Hi, this is my review of The Adventurers Party by Alternative Armies. This is a complete party of adventurers, that is 10 white metal miniatures, 28mm miniatures that will allow you to represent any sort of character class, archetype, or character role in different fantasy war games, fantasy role-playing games, or perhaps even science fantasy games. Before we begin, let me talk a bit about the Alternative Armies website. Here you're going to find all sorts of miniatures. You're going to find fantasy miniatures, science fiction miniatures, some more specific subgenres. Because for example, they have the Flintlock game system that features a Napoleonic fantasy war game. And they also have Slaughterloo, which is the mass battles version of that game. They have different mythological games, they have a post-apocalypse game, they also have miniatures for other game systems. For example, you play Ganesha games, you're going to find pretty much any miniature concerning different units in those books. So if you're looking for some unusual miniatures, you definitely need to visit this website. They even have some miniatures that I thought were out of print. There's a very strong old school flavor for the entire website and for the ranges of miniatures that they handle. So definitely visit them. And they also visit their sister site, which is the Iron Age war game, because it's a science fiction game with a strong space opera theme. Now, moving on to the Adventurers Party review. These miniatures, even though they exhibit these square bases, those bases are sold separately. So let's talk about the physical quality of the miniatures. Even though they do not have those square bases, they come with their own bases attached to the metal sculpture. And here I'm going to show you just how practical that little base is. I'm going to show you a video clip where I'm slamming the surface on which I place them, and you will see that they do not fall or topple down so easily. I need to actually shake the surface quite vigorously so that they fall down, so they are quite functional even if you decide not to purchase a larger base for them. So check this clip out. So as you can see in the video clip, I simply couldn't topple down these miniatures. I really had to shake the surface quite vigorously to make them fall down. So even if you decide not to get some larger bases for your miniatures, the base attached to the feet of each miniature is quite practical, quite functional. However, I would recommend that you check out the bases sold at the Alternative Armies website, because those bases are very thick and quite easy to paint and decorate. So definitely consider that. And I also forgot to mention that the Alternative Armies website handles a pre-painted miniature service. That is, they can paint any miniature, probably any miniature that you can purchase in this website. So if you're someone who simply can't find the time to paint your miniatures or develop the skills to paint your miniatures, you could purchase these miniatures pre-painted here in Alternative Armies. So keep that in mind. Now, these miniatures are shown pre-painted, just like you would see them in the Alternative Armies website. But by the end of this video, you will see a couple of them that I painted just to test how good they were if you applied some different color schemes to them. When it comes to the durability of the miniatures, they are quite perfect. They are very sturdy. It's a very sturdy white metal. There are some metal miniatures from other companies that I've noticed that they are somewhat frail. Their weapons or their arms sometimes they could break down quite easily. But these Adventurers Party miniatures, they're going to stand the test of time, and the molds came out quite clean. I didn't find like mold lines that presented a bit of an obstacle to painting the miniature properly. I just had to do some light cleanup with a modeling knife, and the few mold lines that I found, and they weren't many, came off quite easily. I did find a couple of things that I would consider not exactly too bad, but a consideration when you're cleaning your miniatures, and that is in the Bard miniature. I did find a bit of a wad of metal on the strings, so I had to be extra careful to remove that little piece of metal without damaging the strings. And the shield of the cleric, he has this a bit like marks upon it, but I think it's quite easy to use green stuff. It's going to be quite easy for you to fill those dents or any imperfection upon the shield. I actually didn't use green stuff, I just added 2 or 3 layers of paint, and the surface ended up sufficiently smooth. But if you are a perfectionist, I think you will have no trouble at all correcting those imperfections. Now let's take a look at each miniature, including those miniatures that I painted with my own hand and brush. First, we have the Elf Fighter. I really like this miniature. It fits so many different archetypes and classes. You could use it to represent a fighter wizard or a magus, perhaps an arcane archer or a ranger, an eldritch knight. So you can see it's quite useful to represent many different roles and character classes, and it's quite easy to make conversions with it. You could perhaps replace the sword with an axe or with a mace, or perhaps make some modifications to the original sword and give it a bit more of an exotic look. And then we have the human bard with instrument. This miniature is also quite perfect. You can create some very interesting color coordinations because of his outfit, and you can use it to represent bards, mountebanks, rogues. Perhaps you could even play around with the instrument, replace some parts of it and paint it with your own markings and styles. And then we have the half-orc fighter. This half-orc with a torch and a flail, I think that it's also quite useful to represent if you have like a half-orc hireling or henchman or sidekick, because during adventures it's quite common for you to hand out the torch to your henchman or hireling, because you want both of your hands, perhaps you're using a sword and a shield or a two-handed weapon, or you just want one hand free just in case. So this miniature is perfect to represent a player character or perhaps a hireling. It's also quite easy to replace the torch with some other type of weapon. Maybe it's a dual-wielding orc, so that's going to be quite useful. And then you have a cleric. This is my painted version of the cleric, and you can see the difference. First, let's take a look at the Alternative Armies website, a display of the cleric. And now this is my painted version of the cleric. As you can see, I went a bit more exotic with the shield, so you can create any cleric imaginable. Perhaps even a paladin, even more so if you decide to replace the weapon with something more paladin-like, although there are also paladins that use maces and such, or morning stars. So this is a very solid and archetypical miniature to represent any sort of, let's say, priestly or perhaps even scholarly or knightly type of character. And then you have the female halfling with lantern. Another miniature that I think lends itself quite well to represent a henchman. But if you want to use it as a player character, it could fit into different archetypes or classes. It could be perhaps a rogue, perhaps even a monk with that walking stick. It could be perhaps a quarterstaff, or perhaps even a wizard or sorcerer. And then we have the elf thief with dagger. This miniature is also one of my favorites of this particular pack, because you could also use it as an assassin or as a wizard, sorcerer, perhaps a death priest. It's very useful to represent many different character classes, and depending on the colors that you use, you could give it a more somber or more cheerful look. And then we have the female human thief. Now this miniature is quite interesting because I think it's also perfect to represent a thief acrobat or a thief mage or a thief wizard. It's because of the entire arrangement of the cloak and the throwing knife that it feels like a thief that hides some more interesting and particular skills besides just moving around, disarming traps and such. Regardless, a very interesting miniature that could perfectly fit the classical thief archetype as well. And then we have the barbarian. This is my version of the barbarian. And as you can see, I gave it a bit more of a grim or savage look or feel, especially with that bloody axe. So it's very cool looking, and you can see the detail of the muscles, and depending on the colors that you use in the boots or in the loincloth, it's going to have a particular feel to it, and you can also play around with the colors of the hair, of course. And then we have the human ranger with bow. Another very interesting miniature. If you want to use it perhaps as a thief or as a rogue, you could also it could also fit that role or archetype. And you can play around with the camouflage. Perhaps if you're playing in a somewhat let's say snowy setting, you could perhaps give him a white cloak or something a bit more grayish. It's very interesting how you could play around with the colors of his outfit. But to represent a ranger, a scout or forester type of character, this is perfect. And then we have the fighter in plate armor with greatsword. This miniature is perfect to represent not only fighters, you can also represent knights, paladins or cavaliers, perhaps even a commander or general type of miniature. It has that sense of great authority to it. So what do I think of this Adventurers Party pack? I must inform you that at the moment of this review, there is a discount. You had a 15% off of the Adventurers Party, so you may want to take advantage of that. So I think it's a very good deal because considering the quality of the miniatures and the ways in which you can use them, this is one of those packs that you're going to be using your entire gaming career. If you're playing fantasy war games or role-playing games, these miniatures are perfect to represent perhaps hero type of characters or an entire unit, perhaps for example of barbarians. You could purchase several packs and create your own group of rangers, of barbarians, or fighters. But these miniatures are so powerful and expressive that I think that they could also serve to represent an entire unit of generic type of miniatures. Because for example, let's take the barbarian and just use some more dull looking plastic barbarians perhaps. Just having this barbarian miniature at the center of your unit is going to let's say cover the entire unit of miniatures with its own barbarian feel. So each of these miniatures can serve as a figurehead for a unit in a war game or of an entire party of adventurers. I also like it that each miniature contains enough aesthetic elements to represent a character class, but enough flexibility to represent other things. Like as I was saying, that some thief characters could also represent sorcerers, some fighters could serve perhaps as barbarians, and vice versa. So any type of archetype or class, berserkers, illusionists, necromancers. I can definitely see the elf thief representing a necromancer. So it's all right here. So you can purchase this entire adventurer party pack and have the perfect group of miniatures for any role-playing game or fantasy war game. I definitely recommend that you get the Adventurers Party. And did you take a look at the Alternative Armies website and the Iron Age website? All of the links are going to be in the description of this video below, so you can find the perfect miniature for your gaming needs. Well, thanks for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.